Welcome to the only multi-character guide you'll ever need. Now, I've done 3 of these already if you haven't seen them, Commando, Huntress, and Bandit. But MUL-T is the first one where things start to actually get a little bit complicated. And that's because MUL-T is the most customizable survivor in the game. You can pretty much obtain any sort of build depending on the combination of abilities you give this guy. So in other words, MUL-T can be completely a proc survivor or completely a burst survivor. Let's just look at the primary for example. MUL-T can choose 2 primaries per run. The first being Nail Gun, which is essentially a machine gun of nails. The second is Rebar Puncher, which is a railgun. The third is Scrap Launcher, think of it like a grenade launcher. And the fourth is Power Saw. It's literally a saw. And before we talk about those in too much detail, I'll go through the other abilities quickly. The secondary is a great control ability which allows you to stun multiple enemies in a large area. It's a great way to break up combat if you need to escape. The utility is a 4-in-1 special. Firstly, it is a mobility skill, allows you to dash out of any sort of danger. It also deals damage on every enemy you hit, and you bounce off of larger enemies. It also acts as another version of stun. When you hit an enemy, they are stunned for a short period of time. It also gives you a big armor boost, and I mean a pretty substantial armor boost. One of the most helpful pieces of transport mode is that it's really good at minimizing fall damage. If you're about to take fall damage, go into transport mode, you'll gain a bunch of armor and take way less. One thing to note about this utility is the damage when hitting enemies scales with movement speed. So if you find that you have a ton of movement speed in a run, you will deal more damage on a hit. Now these special abilities are Retool and Power Mode. And on paper, it feels like Power Mode is a no-brainer. Retool allows you to have one primary and then switch to your second primary, while Power Mode allows you to have both out at the same time. But interestingly enough, these are both viable for completely different builds. In fact, everything you use with MUL-T will be viable, but there really are 2 builds that will outshine any other MUL-T build. Those being Power Mode Double Nail Gun or Retool Double Rebar Puncher. Scrap Launcher is very meh, and saws, however fun they may be, are also kinda meh. So let's start with Double Nail Gun Power Mode. The best way to describe Double Nail Gun Power Mode is simply a tank with really high fire rate. This is an absolutely cookie cutter proc build. You're looking for tri-tip daggers, syringes or mochas to increase attack speed, any sort of armor, like Repulsion Armor Plate, Opal, Tougher Times Teddy, or Warped Echo. You see, Power Mode gives you half the armor that Transport Mode does, except there's no time limit. You just have this armor anytime you're in Power Mode. You can see here the damage difference on a Stone Titan's laser with no items, which also means healing is super important too. Things like Cautious Slug and Medkit are going to be your friends. Even if you're not moving around that much as Power Mode due to the 60% movement speed debuff, Bustling Fungus is still not your friend. In terms of damage items you're going to want, we talked about bleed and attack speed. Some other items that are going to be pretty helpful since you're getting hit a lot are Roll of Pennies, which give you money every time you're hit, and Razor Wire, which does damage to things near you as you get hit. On a similar note, Frost Relic and Unstable Tesla Coil all damage nearby enemies to you. With this build, you're going to be in the fray for most of it. You can run away for sure by popping into transport mode and getting out, but with enough armor and healing, you're going to be staying in the fray a lot. So things that damage around you like a Focus Crystal are really important. Another thing to mention is the bullet spread is pretty intense with Nail Gun, so staying closer to enemies is going to benefit you a lot. A couple other really good items to note. They're generally good on everyone, but these are especially good for this build. Symbiotic Scorpion, which lowers armor per hit. Clover, to help with any of your proc items. Plasma Shrimp, which works incredibly well with the high fire rate. And a Hopu Feather. The Feather is extra important because movement speed isn't as it usually is with survivors. Generally, the tech is to run around, shoot an enemy, run around, jump, shoot an enemy. With Power Mode, you are sitting in one spot for a while. If you sprint, you come out of Power Mode. So all you're able to do is walk back and forth 60% slower than you usually would. So any sort of upwards mobility is going to make a huge difference in not getting hit. And speaking of movement items, this is how I would rank the big 3 white movement items. In terms of Mocha, Goat Hoof, and Energy Drink, Mocha should be the priority. It's going to give you that movement speed and give you that attack speed that you need. Goat Hoof is also good because it gives you that movement speed even in power mode. And then Energy Drink is last because you can only utilize it if you're sprinting, which isn't really the goal here. One thing to note about MUL-T's movement, which is only the case on MUL-T and Artificer, is the acceleration is a lot slower. Think of it as constantly trying to run on ice maps. There's always a little bit of drift and lag when you're trying to change directions, which can make MUL-T a little bit more difficult against like a Mithrix Pizza attack, or just dodging things in general. Now there's one other aspect of double nailgun power mode that I want to talk about, and that is when you finish shooting an enemy. If you just hold down the auto nailgun, every single nail will deal 70% damage at a constant fire rate. The minute you let go, it instantly sends out a blast of 12 nails at once. In power mode, that's 24 nails at the same time, all with a 0.6 proc coefficient, meaning every percent chance item has a 0.6% multiplier attached to it. So when enemies are low and you want to save a little bit of time, stop shooting them, which seems counterintuitive, but you send out a volley of a bunch of projectiles at once that can often finish the job. On the same note, it gives you a little bit of knockback. Now in a normal run, on stage 1 or 2, when you have, a soldier syringe or two, you're not really going to notice this doing anything. But if you have a bunch of soldier syringes and you find a soldier syringe printer, you can skip the moon pillars and fly around the map by alternating which nail gun you're using. Just by tapping each one back and forth, you can fly really fast if you have enough attack speed. Just be very careful, you control the way down or you will take a bunch of fall damage. Now we can talk about the other really viable MUL-T build, which is double rebar puncher with retool. Now if you're not familiar with this build, it might seem a little bit counterintuitive. Why have one gun when could have two guns? Well see, this is the general fire rate for rebar puncher. It's pretty slow. However, if you retool in between each use of your rebar puncher, the fire rate looks like this. And if you add just one syringe into the mix, it makes it a lot faster. It doesn't increase much past this point, so you don't really need attack speed for this build, but just one or two makes your fire rate of rebar puncher significantly faster. And now that you understand how the build works, let's talk about what the build is. The build is very much a burst build with a lot less bulk. You don't gain the armor from power mode, but you still have it for transport mode if you need it. But items like Roll of Penny or Razor Wire are less effective here because you're going to be trying to not get hit in this build. MUL-T is one of the more tankier survivors in the game, so calling it a glass cannon isn't really correct, but when compared to power mode double nailgun, it definitely is more glass cannon. Items we're looking for are bands, crowbar, and runic lens. Anything that works well for those big burst damage hits. Transport mode can proc bands on its own, which is especially helpful if you have a lot of movement speed, but even if you don't, even the rebar puncher on its own does 600% damage, which procs bands on its own. This is also the build you're going to be using your secondary a lot more. Since you're not going to be locked into power mode, backup mags are more helpful for that enemy control. And when talking about movement speed items, all of them are viable here. Energy drink is just as good because you're going to be sprinting more with this build. The last thing that comes into play are the equipment slots. With retool, you get a second equipment, which is why this build is so much better than power mode double rebar. Having a second equipment means you can bring something like a Royal Capacitor, which already works really well with bands and crowbar, and you can pair that with something like an executive card or a recycler for that utility. Having two equipments also means fuel cell is way more viable, especially considering lysate cell is almost useless with this build. One thing to note about lysate cell and a bunch of the other items I've mentioned, a lot of these items are from specific DLCs. So if there's an item that's not in your game, you can just ignore it, or buy the DLCs. Some of them are really good, especially the Void DLC. That has the plasma shrimp we talked about earlier, and the lysate cell I'm talking about now. So if you don't see them in your game, don't worry, you're not missing anything. You just might have to buy some extra content. But that will just about do it for this MUL-T character guide. If I missed anything, let me know, and if you have any questions, I read every comment. So ask me anything, and I will try my best to answer you. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you all enjoyed, and with all that being said, I'll see you next time with Engineer.